Hi folks, Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational next economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Welcome, Lindsay Cruver, to Next Economy Now. We're so grateful to have you join us. And for our listeners, you are the Director of Research and Development, and would love to hear you share a little bit about what that role is like and how you got into this and your general relationship with the company.
Sure, and thank you for having me. So just as a basic intro, I'm running research and development at Catalina Sea Ranch. I am the daughter of the CEO, and I have a background in biology. I got a bachelor's degree from George Washington University in biology, and I originally started working with the company because I had 2 years of experience working for an FDA-regulated lab, and that was what was needed to start up our own biotoxin testing lab. And so I was brought in to help start that up, and that lab is currently waiting for FDA approval. And in the meantime, I've been working on shoreside research and development. So I really enjoy this work, and offshore low trophic aquaculture is such an important thing, and I'm really excited and passionate about the environment, and I also think that it's exciting for health reasons, and I'll definitely tell you about all of the environmental benefits from this type of ocean farming, I think that that's kind of a lot of people are excited about doing something to improve the health of our oceans and learning about businesses that are solving some of these problems. But as far as health goes as well, I really wasn't aware when I began that shellfish are one of the most sustainable animal proteins on Earth, and they're very, very healthy. And so they have a high omega-3 content, and I can definitely get more into that. But, there's, a movement, I think, of people trying to be more healthy and doing things for environmental reasons, going vegan, and that can have its challenges, and I've definitely tried that before. And for me, it never really worked out. So for me, shellfish is such a great alternative. And so eating more shellfish is a great double win for both environmental reasons and for health. So I really enjoy doing this work.
Well, I am really grateful that you are doing this work. And just for our listeners, so you mentioned Catalina Sea Ranch as an offshore producer, and you use the term low trophic Could you embellish on what is Catalina Sea Ranch, and how do listeners, what would be how would they acquire the products that you produce?
Sure. Yeah, so Catalina Sea Ranch is the first and currently the only offshore aquaculture facility in the United States. We have about 100 acres of ocean space that's located about 6 miles from shore. And that's right off of Los Angeles. So we're right by the Port of Los Angeles, and our current cash crop is mussels. And although we're still in the R&D phase with a bunch of other native sustainable shellfish and seaweed crops, so that's where we're going in the future. But right now, our main cash crop is mussels. And just for some of your listeners who may not be familiar with aquaculture, because I found that it can be a new term for some, it is the farming of seafood or ocean-grown products either in the ocean or on land. They do it on land. We are choosing to do it in the ocean. And, there are two unfortunate things regarding aquaculture in the United States, and one being that the United States is actually far, far behind many other countries in terms of production and technology in aquaculture, including third world countries. And this definitely has to change, and it should change in the coming years, but I'll definitely talk more about that later. But the second unfortunate thing about aquaculture is that it tends to be synonymous in this culture with being dirty, and it doesn't have to be so. And this is definitely going to change in the coming years with different farming practices. The fact that it is associated like that is coming from farming practices that occurred in the past with fish farming and feeding the fish suboptimal diets, and those diets are not good for them and not good for us, and it creates a lot of waste. And I wanted everybody to know that actually shellfish farming is a completely different story. Farmed shellfish is actually no different from wild caught from either a health or an environmental perspective. And actually, farmed shellfish is probably more beneficial to the environment because you don't have to feed them. Their carbon footprint is low, and doing offshore farming of mussels like we do is actually regenerative. Regenerative being even better than sustainable because it creates a habitat for fish and other species to gather and to proliferate while they're filtering the oceans. And that habitat, in our case, was not there in the beginning. So it's creating habitat for fish. And so it's a fantastic way to farm food, and we really should be doing more of it. And again, it's the most sustainable animal protein available. So mussels are really a great thing. But back to Catalina Sea Ranch and why it's unique. Like I mentioned before, we are the first and right now the only aquaculture facility in federal waters. So federal waters is defined as being more than 3 miles from the coast. And almost all, except for us, ocean farming occurs close to shore, being in state waters, and that would be within 3 miles from the coast. And after the 3 mile point, it becomes federal waters. So the reason that that is significant is that federal waters is really the only place that we can significantly expand ocean farming. And the purpose of that would be to reduce the $15 billion seafood trade deficit that we have in this country. And so we really need to be focusing on federal waters. And the reason for that is that you really won't get a permit for farming in state waters in California. There's a lot of that not in my backyard going on in California, and because it's close to shore. And so new permits have not been issued for actually the last 20 years. And so at the same time, we have this $15 billion seafood trade deficit. So we're importing all of this seafood despite the fact that we have so much coastline and access to the sea. And, in fact, Secretary Ross from the Department of Commerce, when he was confirmed, he stated that the United States has the largest EEZ of all countries, and we should really be net exporters rather than importing. So he really has his eye on the seafood trade deficit. And, we're importing all this seafood from Asia. 90% of our seafood comes from Asia. We import 30 million pounds of live mussels from Canada, and this is coming from Prince Edward Island on the East Coast. And so that's 3,500 air polluting miles away from California. So there's no reason why we can't grow our own. And so how are we going to do that? Well, there's plenty of room in federal waters, and Catalina Sea Ranch is doing that, and currently the only company doing that so far. So yeah, there's a lot of potential opportunity for reducing the seafood deficit offshore in federal waters. Right now we have 100 acres, and we are applying for 3,000 more acres right now on what is called the San Pedro Shelf. And the San Pedro Shelf is an underwater plateau. It's right off the coast of Los Angeles, and it's perfect for aquaculture. Our farm is about 150 feet depth, the water, and right at the edge of that plateau, there's a steep drop off, and the depth plunges, and this creates this phenomenon called upwelling. And this means that there are nutrients down thousands of feet below, and they're brought to the surface by these ocean currents that hit the plateau edge. And that those nutrients feed the phytoplankton, which is the food that mussels and shellfish feed on. So there's plenty of food to eat. There are no major storms or hurricanes. And the shelf, the San Pedro Shelf, is located right next to the two largest ports in America, the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach. And so it's a great location, and we've actually trademarked the term aquaculture capital of America because we know the San Pedro Shelf will be kickstarting a major movement into offshore aquaculture. So hopefully we can put a dent in the $15 billion seafood trade deficit. So that's what we're doing, and we're starting with low trophic aquaculture, which means that these shellfish are low on the food chain. For example, a tuna is pretty high up on the food chain, so it's eating many different little fish before it gets to the final product on your plate. And that would be a higher trophic level. And we are focusing on low trophic aquaculture because it's much more sustainable and better for the environment.
Thank you for elaborating all of that for our listeners. I really, really in particular appreciate this idea of low trophic. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to kind of some of the new exciting events, the recent harvest and what that actually looks like, and even a little bit more embellishment on how that habitat is created through the growing of mussels. What does that look like under the water in terms of benefiting? I know a lot of our listeners are concerned about how the ocean is being impacted through overfishing. Love to hear.
Right. Yes, of course. That's definitely a big issue. The fact that we hit peak fish 20 years ago. So that means that we are pulling more fish out of the ocean than are regenerating themselves naturally. And that's a really big problem. Actually, a side story that kind of demonstrates that is that we are currently renting space in the Port of Los Angeles, and there are warehouses everywhere everywhere that have been abandoned for 60 years because of the collapse of the tuna industry, because they were overfished. So since then, there's been really not a whole lot of activity in the port of LA. So we're hoping to bring some more activity back to that port. But as far as some of these warehouses and the processing facilities go. But yeah, peak fish is a big deal, and I think that we need to educate people a little bit more about wild-caught fisheries, and it's really hard to manage. So we really should be eating more farmed seafood, and low trophic seafood is even better. So with low trophic aquaculture, for example, shellfish or the mussels that we're producing, we don't feed them anything. They naturally filter feed the phytoplankton that it's just naturally occurring in the environment, and we don't add anything to it. We stick the seed in the water, they feed themselves, a year later they're ready to go. It's very easy, it's great for the environment, so it requires no feed, no fertilizer, and no fresh water. That's a really big deal. So it's very sustainable model. But I also wanted to go a little bit more into what our ranch actually looks like, because I think that unless you've seen pictures, you might not know, or it might be hard to imagine what it's like growing out there. So like I said before, we're 6 miles offshore. And so if you're in a very fast boat, it might take a half an hour to get out there, and you're in the middle of the open ocean. There's not much out there, and all you'll really see from the surface is a bunch of floats. They're going to be black floats, and then 4 corner buoys. And then on one of the corner buoys, we have what's called a nomad research buoy, and that collects a bunch of oceanographic data, and it transmits it real time back to shore for us to assess the health of the ranch and any kind of impact that our ranch is having on the surrounding environment. We really keep close tabs on that kind of data. So that's really all you're going to see when you get out there. And all of the good stuff happens 20 feet under the surface. So there's a bunch of mussels hanging from ropes 20 feet down. So we have these backbone structures, which are very thick ropes, which carry what we call mussel ropes, where these mussels will attach with their byssal threads. So they have these threads that go out and just grab onto things. And that's how they grow. They just attach to something and they grow. So they'll attach onto these ropes, and we put the ropes, we hang it on the backbone line, suspended 20 feet down. And then the whole thing is anchored to the bottom of the ocean, 150 feet down, and these anchors are screwed into the sand. And another thing that I wanted to mention is really when you get out there, there's nothing. If you're looking at the surface or the floor of the ocean, it's just mud and sand. There's really not a whole lot of habitat. And so we are really bringing habitat into that area because it creates, permanent structure that fish can hide in, and they can nibble things off of our lines. They don't actually eat the mussels, but they'll eat little, things that settle onto the lines, brine shrimp or other little, we call it biofouling. So, and they'll use that space to rest and to breed. So it's really great to create habitat, because otherwise there's nothing out there, and they'll just, you have fish and you have dolphins passing through, but they don't really stay. And that's even more important with the devastation of our kelp forests, and as those get destroyed, we need to create habitat for fish to repopulate. So yeah, it's a great it's a positive thing for the environment, and we're using this long line technology borrowed from New Zealand. And New Zealand is actually a really major producer of a unique type of mussel called the green shell mussel. And so all of this was borrowed from New Zealand, but we have these 40 different lines that are 600 feet long, and they're all 20 feet below the surface. And also, I wanted to mention that it's kind of a neat thing because, you know, when you go out there, you can dive below the surface. There's all kinds of fish down there. And it's actually the hottest new fishing spot for yellowtail as well. So we've gone out there to the ranch on the weekends and seen up to 100 commercial and recreational fishing boats right on top of our ranch, and they're nowhere else. They're just right on top of our ranch, crowded in, and they're all fishing yellowtail that are attracted to the ranch. So it is kind of a unique thing. And especially considering the desolation of the area, it's really devoid relatively of life. But we do know that shellfish grow there. We knew that in the beginning, which is why we chose that site. There are actually these oil rigs that are about 2 miles away from our ranch. And we know that mussels and scallops grow so prolifically on the legs of these oil rig platforms that the oil companies have to go in and scrape the legs, scrape these shellfish off the legs of the platforms because they grow so heavy that the weight starts to jeopardize the structural integrity of the oil rig. So there's tons of nutrients out there from the upwelling that I mentioned before, but there's just no surface, there's no substrate to attach to, there's no habitat out there. So other than the oil rigs, nothing else grows out there. And so it's a great location. We just have to provide a structure, which is what we're doing with this longline technology, is providing a structure for shellfish to grow.
Well, thank you so much for painting that picture for our listeners. I think that's really helpful for people to grok why this is a really unique, and I almost hesitate to call it aquaculture because there's such a bad rap out there, but this is just you've really explained how it's a benefit to people and planet. Do you want to go a little bit deeper into the people aspect and into how this type of consumption pattern of low trophic shellfish aquaculture can benefit our own bodies and our health?
Yeah, sure. So there are a lot of health benefits to mussels, which I'm really excited about. I eat mussels all the time. It's such a healthy, clean source of protein, and super sustainable. So like I said, it's a double win. And there's a lot of omega-3s in mussels. And omega-3s, it's, you know, a lot of people are hearing about that these days. Our brain is actually 60% fat, and half of that is DHA, which is the type of omega-3. So there's actually compelling evidence that one of the reasons that humans have evolved these huge brains so long ago is that they were primarily eating shellfish, because shellfish have a lot of DHA in them. So yeah, it's a really, really healthy animal protein for us. And you know, if you compare it to other types of seafoods, shrimp is one of the most popular seafoods that we eat in this country, but it's devastating for the environment. And I don't think that this is also very common. It's really, it's a big problem, and this is why people really need to learn more about where their seafood is coming from and read more up about it, because mangrove forests are being destroyed to plant these shrimp ponds. And mangrove forests are so essential for the coastal ecosystem, but they're being torn down to, you know, grow more shrimp ponds because the demand for shrimp is so high. And then they feed them antibiotics. And, you know, after a few years, these ponds become toxic, so they have to cut down more mangroves for more farms. And so that's a huge problem. And mussels have 3 times the amount of omega-3s of shrimp. So I encourage people to learn more about their seafood and maybe substitute some of their seafood or meat choices for mussels. But yeah, there's a lot of vitamins and nutrients in them. And what's unique about our offshore mussels is that they're being grown so far from land, which is where all the runoff is. So, a lot of these farms, they're grown close to shore. There's a lot of runoff. They're filtering that runoff and all the pollutants that are in it. And so in the case of some of these locations, they actually have to put the shellfish in what's called a depuration tank so it can expel some of these pollutants and bacteria and that kind of thing before they go to market. But we're so far from that we don't have to do that at all. It's just a very clean source of water and clean nutrients that they're filtering. So in my opinion, I think that these are the best quality product for mussels and shellfish. The further offshore, the better. So yeah, that's health benefits for mussels.
Really helpful to think through, and even thinking through the relationship to our land-based agriculture. I think people kind of forget that the runoff that is happening from the choices we make around the food production on shore is affecting our oceans. It's a good reminder. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that, for some reason, our per capita consumption in this country is quite low for mussels, and it shouldn't be so. If you look around the world, the per capita consumption is so low. It's 0.15 pounds per capita, so not even a pound. In the United States, that's how much we eat average. But in Europe, 5 pounds per capita. In New Zealand, they eat 33 pounds per capita. So we have a local mussel here, and everybody in California seems to like local. But just to kind of give you some statistics on what it could be. I mean, we have 40 million people in California who love local, healthy, sustainable seafood. And if we could get up to 5 pounds per capita, just even something on par with what Europe eats, that would be 200 million pounds of mussels. And at a few dollars per pound, that would make a $500 million industry. So increasing, consumption is a really important thing. I think that, learning more about your seafood, maybe substituting some of these seafoods for healthier, more sustainable products is very important.
And not to mention, you mentioned the environmental repercussions, but also the human repercussions of not knowing where our seafood is coming from and actually unintentionally contributing to these, Thai slavery, indentured slavery for years and years. So I'm appreciating you bringing in the jobs piece and the discussion around how your work is benefiting, supporting. Could you speak a little bit more about that industry and what your hopes or vision might be?
Sure. Yeah. Transparency is really important for us as we go forward. And it's starting to be on the radar for the seafood industry in general, but I think it's going to take a little while. But for us, it's very important. We're very interested in traceability. So we are in the middle of an R&D project to explore traceability for our mussels. And so we want to have full transparency for our consumers, showing them the entire chain of transport from harvest to plate. And so currently the mussels that we harvest, they go through several middlemen or distributors before they get to the consumer. And right now there's just a tag that says how old the mussels are and where they're from. And that's actually required by law to be attached to the bag at the time of harvest. And you as a consumer have the right to see that tag when you purchase mussels, either from the restaurant or a grocery store, but people don't know. And so they're actually required by law to show you that tag. And actually, sometimes when I ask restaurants and grocery stores, they're actually often unprepared when I ask them. Some of the lower end grocery stores will keep their lower quality, Canadian imports, for example, on the shelf for up to 3 weeks because I think nobody's checking. I don't know. The higher end of grocery stores are much better about that. They definitely keep on top of shelf life. But this is definitely something that people can be more concerned with. And so for us, instead of having this tag, this physical tag that follows the bag that nobody ever really checks, we want to have a QR code, for example, that's scannable either at the tag on the seafood counter at the grocery store or right on the restaurant menu. And so this QR code is going to tell you things like the date of harvest and that they're Catalina Sea Ranch mussels. It'll give you a link, and you can, you're looking this up on your smartphone, and it'll give you a link to our website. You can learn when it was planted, and you can learn about the oceanographic data about the water when the mussel was harvested, and this is all being collected by our real-time Nomad buoy. So it essentially gives you information about the health of the ecosystem during that mussel's lifetime. And we can, while you're on our website, we can teach you all about the sustainability and the regenerative properties of the ranch, and you can learn about the brand, and we can tell you a story about your food in much greater detail than your waiter can tell you, who's probably too busy. So yeah, we think that this is really important, that everybody should know everything about their food. And, when you think about it, this food, it's going into our bodies. We're putting it in our bodies and it's keeping us alive, but we don't really care to look up any information about it. We don't really know a whole lot about it. And I think this is definitely changing. And this is why we have, for example, some of these controversial documentaries on Netflix about how our food is being grown. But, people just aren't really paying attention, and they're really not encouraged to either because they're not given any information about their food. So we want to change that. We want to be very transparent about our shellfish, and it's really, really important for fish, for example, because this traceability, it protects the oceans from illegal fishing, for example. And up to 30% of fish is counterfeited or mislabeled. So it's really just a matter of time before this is standard practice in the industry. So we want to get a head start on that.
Lindsay, thank you so much. You've given such a comprehensive explanation to our listeners. As we close our conversation here, I want to ask you, what do you need right now? What support could be helpful from our listeners? Should we be going to our restaurants and asking them to source Catalina Sea Ranch mussels, or how can we help you grow your work in the next economy?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that would be helpful, I think that people, once they know about the fact that mussels are the most sustainable animal protein that's available, and spreading that word, I think that it would be great if more people were eating mussels and maybe substituting a burger for a plate of mussels, for example. So eating more mussels is great for the environment, it's great for your health, and definitely looking into offshore Catalina Sea Ranch mussels. They're clean, it's sustainable, it's local, and that's really an important thing. So yes, look for Catalina Sea Ranch mussels. You can go to our website at catalinasearanch.com and find out about where you can purchase the mussels. But in general, maybe just incorporating them more into your diet and spreading the word.
Thank you so much, and really love your leadership in this space. I know just personally, I've seen you out at convenings around supporting this this growing desire for a more regenerative ocean production, shellfish production in California. And even though the permitting is hard right now for closer to shore, you've even been, supporting others who are working towards that vision and just your collaborative nature. I really appreciate that, because we know it's going to take a village to address some of the challenges we're seeing, especially with our oceans. So thank you for that, and for the habitat you're creating. Is there anything last you'd like to share with our listeners before we let you get back to this important work?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And come to our website and subscribe to our newsletter to get information and updates about what we're doing.
Okay, take good care, Lindsay. We'll talk to you again soon.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.